Here's an NBC News projection. State of Florida. NBC News projects that Donald Trump will win Florida and take its 30 electoral votes. The state of Massachusetts, Kamala Harris, the projected winner tonight with 11 electoral votes. Donald Trump, the projected winner in Tennessee tonight, 11 electoral votes there. In the state of Maryland, NBC News projects that will go in the Kamala Harris column. We move on to the state of Missouri. NBC News projects that Donald Trump is the victor in Missouri when all the votes are counted. Here's what Alabama looks like. That will also go to Donald Trump. State of Oklahoma, this will be projected to go to Donald Trump. And in D.C., District of Columbia, 3 electoral votes at stake. NBC News projects that Kamala Harris will win there. So where does that leave us now on the road to 270? Here it is, 90 for Trump right now, 27 for Harris, 270, of course, the magic number and the keys to the White House.
But we await calls in those all-important battlegrounds, and there are still outstanding states. Just as polls closed at 8 o'clock, we will wait for New Jersey, Illinois, Connecticut, and, of course, Pennsylvania as well. Let's show you what we can right now in Pennsylvania. No surprise here. It is too early to call. North Carolina, same story. They do count fast there, but not fast enough to call it. It's still too early to call. Just 5% of the vote in. And in Georgia, we're seeing a lot more of the vote, but still too early to make a projection. Let's go to Tom, who's starting to look at some of the numbers here. And I see you've got Virginia up there, which is a potential bellwether, something that might give us some indication about how this night might go.
Yeah, and it's a state that we can look at to see how the suburbs are going to perform across the country. I know a lot of you guys know the D.C. area very well. 30% of the vote is going to come from these northern suburbs. It's a good barometer to know also how Harris is doing with suburban women. So let's go to 2020 to compare here. So Prince William County, it looks like Harris is slightly down with 75% of the vote in. This one stood out to me. 95% of the vote is in Loudoun County right now. Biden was at 61%. Harris is now at 56%. Again, there's a difference of about 35,000 votes. 95% is in, and we can actually see how much of the vote is left. Only about 3,600 votes remain in Loudoun County. So she's underperforming a little bit there. As we keep going here, Fairfax County, 45% in. She's at 68%. Let's see how Biden was doing there. 69, about the same. Something else that's interesting that's happening in Virginia, Virginia Beach. This is a swing county. Trump won it in 2016. Biden was able to flip it. Tonight, Trump is on top, but only about 20% of the vote is in. A lot of the western part of the state, as we know, is going to be more rural. Some of that coal mining country, it's going to resemble West Virginia. We have some of the vote in a county like over here, Wise County. This is a good Trump barometer. He's at 78%. He was at 80% in 2020, but 41% of the vote is out. He's underperforming slightly. I guess the thing that sticks out to me, which it's too early to know if it's a red flag, but Loudoun County, again, you know, this is a place where Democrats want to run up those votes in Virginia. Not that Virginia is in danger for Democrats because they were able to run up the score in 2020. But Trump in 2016 got close. He got within 5 points. A number like this, it's going to worry them a little bit. But I know you guys know much more about that area than I do.
Well, actually, we're honored to have a resident of the Commonwealth of Virginia with us, Chuck Todd. So, I mean, you look at that. You know those suburban collar counties around Washington, D.C. very well. Is that a warning light if Kamala Harris is not performing as well as Biden did in some of those suburban, exurban counties?
It could be if we're going to see that if it's moving. You know, Virginia is sort of the gateway now to the north rather than being, I always joke, it's sort of seceded from the Confederacy, right? It is the one southern state that has been consistently a Democratic state, not even a swing state anymore. So if that is consistent, yes. One thing I've learned, though, with the Northern Virginia vote, you may have 95% of the vote in. That 5% can account for a lot more uncounted vote than people realize. So, and there is a sense. So that's a wait and see. Look, the bigger thing that I've taken away so far is we are seeing we're in the middle. We've been in the middle of a political realignment for a decade, and every one of these presidential elections, we're like, hey, look at this. The fact of the matter is, Donald Trump's makeup of his electorate this time is much different than it was in 2016 or 2020. And I think we're seeing it both break on ethnicity and geographically. So it looks like that Donald Trump's going to be stronger in the Southeast. Why? Because he is doing better with Hispanics.
That's right.
And there is a larger population of Hispanics in the Southeast and the Southwest than any other part of this country. The exit polls indicate that she is going to do better with older white women. I've been messing around with Indiana. Indiana's not going to, it's a red state. Yeah. Donald Trump's underperforming about a point or two in almost, even in the rural counties. Indiana's a very white state. That's a tea leaf. Yeah, I just throw it out there. It's a tea leaf. They obviously border
where those voters go.
No, that she's performing a couple of points better. So clearly there are some older whites And we could really see this country divided by regions, where she's stronger in the north because she's improving with white voters, and he's stronger in the south because he's improving with voters of color, in particular Hispanic voters. We're not seeing as much evidence among African-American voters, but definitely Hispanic voters. It's not just Florida. I think Georgia, we're seeing it as well.
Well, we're seeing it nationally, too. When you look at some of the numbers here, he is +10 specifically with Latino men, according to our exit poll nationally, a demographic group that Joe Biden was +23 with 4 years ago. So it is definitely a shift, and it is definitely one of the headlines that we're watching as we're seeing these exit polls come in.
And we see that, I mean, the Latino vote is not just concentrated in the Southwest.
That's exactly right.
It's not just the Southeast. It's also in Pennsylvania. There's a huge Latino population in Pennsylvania.
We have been talking about the ground game quite a bit. It's been heavily focused in Pennsylvania on trying to energize Latinos on both sides. Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump really focusing on that in places like Allentown, in places like Reading, Pennsylvania, trying to make sure that they are getting them out to vote and flipping them if necessary.
And let's not forget, Kamala Harris wrapped up her campaign last night in Philadelphia, showing once again demonstrating the importance of that state, as we are going to find out here in the hours to come and perhaps days.
And Hallie, you've got some more from your exit polls.
You know, it's interesting. Chuck's talking about the graceful removal from the chair. Thank you all for bearing with me. Chuck's talking about the realignment here and where people are sort of politically. One of the things we're watching on that front is this idea of independent voters. We know that they are going to be potentially a crucial voting bloc here. Vice President Harris had made overtures to this group in the closing weeks of her campaign, really trying to win them over, to get them over to her side. Look at how they're breaking nationally here. She is winning independent voters nationally, 51%, Donald Trump 44%. Here's the thing. Nationally is not how you win or lose the White House. You win the White House in the battleground states. And look at the state of states, Pennsylvania, right? The most key battleground this year. In Pennsylvania, it's the opposite. It's former President Trump who is actually leading with independents over Vice President Harris in this really important state where the margins could be really close here. You can see it here. He's at 50%. She's at 44%. Again, that's in Pennsylvania. So you might ask, okay, well, how does that compare to how he did 4 years ago? He is overperforming generally with independents now in Pennsylvania. You see in 2020, 44%. He's doing a bit better now in 2024, 50%. And Savannah, Lester, Chuck, Chris, and I'll toss it back to you at the table. This could be really interesting as we watch this develop throughout the course of the night, not just in Pennsylvania, but in some of these other key battlegrounds as well, like Michigan and Wisconsin, which we'll get to later.
Actually, I think Chuck wanted to weigh in.
No, I just think we are seeing something else happen, which is you have a country that's really sour about our politics, sour about the direction of the country, and we now have fewer people identifying with the two major parties, according to our exit poll. It's a huge development. Independents are the fastest growing flock. Now, it's very rational. If you don't like the direction of the country, you don't like what's happening, and you think there's a threat to democracy, do you have a lot of faith in the two major parties? But the lowest share of major party people identifying with the two major parties in at least 4 elections, it means these independent votes are going to be the whole ball game. They're going to decide who's president.
We are keeping a sharp eye on the state of Georgia. We can show you where things stand. But we've just had a change of characterization here. Our characterization from the decision desk now is that this is too close to call. You can see about a 267,000 vote difference between the two, with 37% of the vote in. But again, the NBC News characterization at this point, too close to call in Georgia.
We've got a lot of contributors lined up to talk to you tonight. We've got Senator Claire McCaskill, I believe, over at our Insider's desk. And Senator, I wonder what you thought about that. What some are seeing is something of an alarm bell. This Loudoun County, suburban Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, where it seems that Kamala Harris is underperforming. And as you well know, the suburbs in the battleground states are key to her victory.
Yeah, listen, this is the witching hour. You know, this is when it is very early. We have exit polls. And by the way, if exit polls were correct, I would be governor and John Kerry would have been president and Hillary Clinton would have been president. So I think we've got to take all of that with a big, giant grain of salt and wait for the actual numbers to come in. Because as we all know, these come in from different places. Typically, rural places come in before urban locations. So I think she's going to be fine in the suburbs. I think, and I don't think the exit polls will actually reflect accurately what will happen with independent voters. I'm not saying she's going to dominate independent voters, but I'll be very surprised if there aren't a whole lot of women that call themselves independents that don't vote for Donald Trump.
At what point in all this do you begin to let out a sigh of relief here?
Well,
Never, probably,
listen,
right?
I think depending on what happens in Georgia and North Carolina, if by any chance she wins those 2 states, then I can breathe again. If she does not, then obviously Pennsylvania becomes even bigger. And don't sleep on Nevada. I think that may be the closest margin in this race. I think it may be literally maybe 500 to 2,000 votes separating the 2 candidates. I think it's that close in Nevada.
Well, we're waiting polls to close there in less than an hour. Nevada and Arizona, those big Western battlegrounds, but we do not expect results there, frankly, for days. So I guess Senator McCaskill is going to be holding her breath for a very, very long time. We've got Sarah Fagan here, too, a veteran of Republican campaigns. And again, with all the caveats, we are reading tea leaves right now, Sarah. What are you looking at? What are you noticing? And how do you see this shaking out?
So if you look at Florida, you look at Virginia, Donald Trump is running about 4 points better than he did in 2020. But then contrast Georgia and North Carolina, where I should caveat that less of the vote is in. He's running 1 point ahead in Georgia. He's running a little behind in North Carolina, where he did in 2020. And that says to me, perhaps, that the Harris GOTV effort is quite strong, that she's pulling her votes out in places where the campaign organized. So she's holding that margin closer.
And the GOTV, for those of you just joining us on Political Nerd Fest, get out the vote, the ground game, when we're talking about it. You know, this is about when you say, you pull the bus up and you say, let's go. We're going to hold you by the hand and take you to the polls. Yeah. And organizing is the key to any successful campaign.
Absolutely. And you have the Harris campaign touting the fact that, for example, they knocked on 3 million doors over the weekends. It winds up being numbers, though, until people actually go to the polls and vote. And I do think, just bouncing off something that Chuck said earlier, it's just to zoom out for a moment. Remember that one of the biggest issues of this campaign was change. What people really want is change. And so what you saw in both of their closing arguments was an attempt to argue they're the change candidate. And so what we are seeing, for example, with independents, I think is notable, because I think the person who winds up winning this race will be the person who ultimately voters say, that's the change candidate.
And like everything in this election year, it's complicated because you have a former president, so there's a certain incumbency there, and a sitting vice president. And there's certain incumbency there as well.
There's something baked into Donald Trump's call for a change here, because he was already in the White House for 4 years. Same thing for Vice President Harris, as you're looking at the popularity or favorability rating for President Biden, which is low. And so the question, is that going to be a drag on how she does? To your point on the get out the vote effort, this is why early vote was critical for both of these campaigns, with some 79 million people voting early. Better to bank those votes. What if somebody gets sick? What if somebody's, kid has to stay out of school or whatever? Get those votes in now to get them locked and loaded.
Let me just change the conversation just for a moment, because we do have another call to make, and it's an NBC News projection in the state of South Carolina. South Carolina will go to Donald Trump when all the votes are counted later. And here's where the breakdown right now, that Donald Trump, again, the projected winner. 24% of the vote in there, a vote difference of about 104,000. But again, Donald Trump will pick up South Carolina. Here's where it leaves us on the road to 270. Donald Trump out in front with 99. Kamala Harris, 27.
We've got a few key battlegrounds where polls have closed. They're counting, but we don't have results yet. Still either too early to call or too close to call. Let's go to NBC's Garrett Haake. He's at Trump headquarters in West Palm Beach, Florida, at Mar-a-Lago. Tell us what the campaign is saying to you.
Well, Savannah, what seems to be calming nerves down the street at Mar-a-Lago is what they're seeing out of Georgia right now, a state you were just discussing, where their key to victory was essentially blowing the doors off in rural turnout and improving their margins among minority voters, Latino voters, black voters. The campaign is seeing, in the same exit polls we're looking at, improvement among black voters, particularly black men, who the Trump campaign has spent heavily for months and months and months to try to win over even just a few percentage points, the kind of thing that could make a difference. Republicans in a state decided by fewer than 12,000 votes 4 years ago. The other thing that I think has accrued to Trump's favor in Georgia is the resumption of unity among Georgia Republicans. Remember, there was a huge fallout with Brian Kemp, the popular Republican governor there, after 2020. Trump and Kemp made amends, although they rarely appeared together on the campaign trail. The two singing from the same hymnal in the race's closing weeks, along with a lot of these other Trump candidates, could be helpful to Trump in that state.
All right, Garrett, we have a call to make. This is North Carolina, the governor's race there. Josh Stein, the Democrat, takes the race there. He faced off against the Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, a very controversial candidate. And the polls had well, we talked about ticket splitting, where perhaps the vote for the presidency might be different than the vote down ballot. This perhaps will be an indication of that. Josh Stein, the winner of the governor's race in North Carolina. Just a brief word about this controversial lieutenant governor candidate. You both are jumping to tell me who wants to take.
Let me just say one.
We got 9 more hours to go here.
One small thing, which is this, because Kristen will get into, I think, how controversial this Republican gubernatorial candidate was.
You're leaving that to me?
But just remember the ticket splitting piece. This is a state that has ticket split president, governor before. Yeah. That's it, right? So this, I think,
they have a Democratic governor right now.
That's exactly right. So if somebody's looking at this going, well, the Democratic governor won in North Carolina, doesn't that mean maybe that Vice President Harris is a lock? It does not. And just to throw that out there, this is a state that where Republicans know how to check a Republican for president and a Democrat for governor.
But this was a campaign on Mark Robinson's behalf. It was beset by problems.
Beset by problems because he was determined that he posted some highly controversial comments on an adult website. And so the backlash was massive. This result was expected. The question is, that was, by the way, one of the controversies. I'm giving you the biggest one. The question is, will he drag down support for former President Trump? We don't know the answer, but we do know that in 2020, President Biden was not able to win this state because there was, in part, it's believed, a controversial Democratic candidate for Senate. And that did sink his chances. Now, just to zoom out a little bit, a Democrat hasn't won the state of North Carolina since 2008, when Barack Obama did it. Trump added 3 campaign stops in these closing days of the race.
Spent the whole weekend there, 3 days straight in North Carolina.
How important this state is to his path.
Also a sense that it might have been slipping away and trying to shore up.
Absolutely.
North Carolina was very, very tight in 2022. Trump won it, but it was right up there in terms of narrow margins.
Which
Absolutely.
And it's a good reminder that even if the electoral vote count ultimately has a pretty wide gap, these margins can be very tight, and those electoral votes, listen, they all go to the winner, right? So that's what matters here in a state like North Carolina.
Well, we already talked to Garrett Haake, who was in West Palm at Trump headquarters. Let's go over to Peter Alexander. He's at the Harris headquarters in Washington.
Hey, Savannah, you just heard from Garrett a moment ago talking about how Donald Trump's team seems to be satisfied that he is doing a bit better with those Black and Latino voters right now. Similarly, the Harris campaign feels good that she is outperforming with white voters over Joe Biden's performance with them in some of our early exit poll indications in parts of the country right now. One thing they're keeping an eye on. Another thing I'm hearing from senior officials within the campaign as they get ready to start the program here is that they are seeing really good enthusiasm among those youngest voters, those college students in particular right now. They're talking about long lines. You know what? Let me do this. They're starting the Star-Spangled Banner. I'll give it back to you with respect to our country, then we'll come back in a moment.
All right, Peter, that is Harris headquarters in Washington, D.C. We've got Tom Llamas over at the big board.
Yeah, we're talking Georgia, right? Because it is so close. A reminder here, we're talking about Democrats feeling a little hopeful in North Carolina, Republicans feeling a little better about Georgia. If they swap, right, if Democrats win North Carolina and Republicans win Georgia, they're both 16 electoral votes. We're back to square one where we were in 2020. Let's talk about Georgia tonight, because what we're seeing is both camps are overperforming. So it's going to be a nail biter. Remember, in 2020, it came down to about 12,000 votes, a little under that. Let's start in Atlanta, the metro region. Cobb County, we have 57% of the vote in. And let's see how Biden did, 56%. This is actually, Cobb County tells the story of the Atlanta metro region. Newt Gingrich represented Cobb County. And look how Democrats have been able to run up the score. From Romney in 2012, Clinton flips it, and look how they're growing the margins. And tonight, that's exactly what Kamala Harris is doing. She's growing the margins in Cobb County. Let's go around. Let's see what we have in Fulton. Fulton, 53%. Let's see how that compares to Biden, 72. She's holding her own around the Atlanta metro region. Let's see over here. Gwinnett, we only have about 1% in, not really worth a discussion there. Clayton County, 70% in, slightly overperforming Biden. That's pretty good. We'll keep moving. Henry County, 1% in. This is one of those swing counties we can talk about. 1% in. I don't know how much we're going to be able to say there. Rockdale County, again, those Atlanta suburbs, 77% of the vote in. She's overperforming there. Okay, that's Harris. That's the Democrats. Let's go to these rural regions. Rabun, 95% in. Trump at 78 in 2020. He's at 78 right now. You can see he's holding his marks. Union County, a little bit lower, but again, he's around the 80% mark where he should be, and overperforming in White County. Again, those are the rural counties. Let's go to Georgia's Black Belt, where they have counties with lots of African-American voters. Here in Doherty, this is about 70% African-American here, slightly overperforming Biden. So again, guys, what I'm trying to say here is that right now, it's very similar to what we saw in 2020. Trump seems to be hitting his marks where he was in the rural counties. In those African-American counties and around the Atlanta region, Democrats are hitting those marks. It's going to be very close. It's one of the reasons why when we click on Georgia right here, it is literally just too close to call, guys.
All right, Tom, we got a lot ahead here. We're going to take a break, and then another state closing its polls. Which candidate will it bring closer to those crucial 270 Electoral College votes? We will be right back. Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.